Hi. We are here with Piia Varis. She's associate professor at University of Tilburg and researcher in the wonderful Babylon Center. She's doing an extremely important work on discourse studies and the digital world, which means digital culture, digital media, digital ethnography, and social media. So thanks for agreeing to participate in this series of interview, Pia. ALAB, Associação de Linguística Aplicada do Brasil, Association of Applied Linguistics of Brazil, is interviewing a series of scholars in the field of language studies to reflect upon the challenges the contemporary scenario poses for communication, interaction, and identity performances. A central issue in these conversations is the friction between traditional forms of meaning making and emerging possibilities. Our audience can know more about this interview in ALAB's website. Please go there to see more. And this year, 2020, is the anniversary of 30 years of ALAB, an association that has helped to advance the field of critical linguistic studies in Brazil. So, Pia, your collaboration in this project is a great honor. Thank you again. Let's start with a more general question, okay? So how do you approach the relationship between online and offline lives? What are you thinking about?
First of all, thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to join you. It's an honor. Yes, a very important central question to my work, the online-offline relationship. I find it a little bit difficult to tackle sometimes from this broad perspective of online-offline distinction, because so much depends on your analytical perspective. So what exactly is it that you're trying to figure out? So for instance, now I'm obviously both online and offline. So what is it that we're talking about here? And in that sense, I like to talk more about digital mediation and the fact of our lives being digital, which brings a bit of a different perspective and a starting point to looking at the ways in which digital technologies mediate our lives. And the other reason why I find the online-offline distinction sometimes difficult is identifying where exactly, for instance, texts and discourses originate, how do they circulate, and in that sense, it's good to zoom into the specific environments, right, that we're talking about, because online-offline is kind of very broad, but also very narrow at the same time in explaining what exactly is happening.
Yeah. So the second question has to do with the viral phenomenon which you've worked on, and how does that relate to what the extreme right is doing with it all over the world?
Yeah, that's such a relevant question. The first thing that actually comes to mind is the question of visibility. So previously, there's been so much talk about the fact of hidden virality, right? And from what I understand in Brazil, for instance, WhatsApp being very central in their practices and in the circulation of messages. But this remains very much invisible to us because of the nature of the medium, right? It's nowhere in the public space to be seen. Very much hidden activity unless you go and infiltrate in these groups and start, so to speak, a bit of a detective activity, start following them there. So that's one thing in which they are quite good, but also in terms of viral practices. So, you know, the whole idea that the left can't meme, whereas extreme right and right-wing movements are very good at designing and creating viral messages. And also, as my colleague Iko Malias has mentioned in his and explained in his research, very good at making use of the algorithmic affordances of different social media. So playing into the algorithms and making sure that their messages become visible through the use of certain hashtags, for example. So there is a lot, I think, there to investigate in terms of the kinds of practices that they use, both in the visible sphere of social media, but also the hidden virality of Facebook groups, closed groups, and different messaging environments.
So would you mind to comment a little bit about the concept of text trajectories in this context? Maybe something about the analytical production of analysis on this concept.
Yeah, this is something that I find very useful myself in my own work, and also in relation to virality, because it's often talked about in the quantitative sense. So when does something become viral? It's viral when it has been shared a certain number of times, for example. But maybe it's more useful from our perspective also to think about virality in terms of indexical orders taking shape. So certain meanings and signs become shared, and that's where the viral phenomena starts to take place. And text trajectories, I think, is a useful concept because it partly perhaps also takes us away from this understanding of flows, which is, in my understanding, gives a bit of a too easy and easily distributable idea of how messages circulate and are circulated, because there's a lot of actually semiotic work involved. It's not just that something flows, but freely on social media, but it happens through all kinds of semiotic work and by making use of the affordances of each medium. So I think text trajectories in applying that, we get to add some detail and nuance onto how actually viral phenomena, for example, take place online. Bit of a winding answer, but I hope that makes sense somehow.
The other question is related to how the contemporary scenario affects communication, identity performances, and also, if I may add, another issue, education, because it seems to me that virality and algorithm and life, if I can put it that way, should be part of contemporary literacy in schools.
Yeah, I really couldn't agree with you more on that. And there is an idea that I've floated a little bit, which is platform literacy. So in addition to, let's say, more traditional media literacy, education, I think, should include a discussion on things like algorithms, the nature of the communicative environment in the first place. So the fact that a lot of communication nowadays takes place in environments, the main aim of which is to monetize social life, gather and collect as much data as possible about us, and design messages to us and streams streams of posts based on that information. And there is still a lack of understanding in general in terms of how these environments actually work and how they might limit, on the one hand, our identity performances and communications, while of course also providing opportunities. So I think there is a job to be done there for us as researchers, but also in terms of media and digital literacy education. So I really couldn't agree with you more on that.
Is that it?
So, okay. Yeah, I just wanted to add something about how do you think about how to navigate in this new scenario? I mean, how to deal with thinking about this for questions, how to deal with as a researchers, also as educators, and etc. Yeah.
So how to think about the contemporary context from the point of view of, yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, one thing that I've been thinking about recently, it has to do with, for instance, surveillance literacy. Because many of these questions actually go to the heart of things like democracy and participation as citizens, not in terms of literacy in the strict sense of being able to decode and understand the environment, but also how do we participate, and who owns and controls the communicative environments that we have, and could we perhaps even imagine the web to be a little bit different, so that participation would be more democratic, there would be more room for creativity and all of that. And when it comes to researching these things, I think what I've learned from media studies scholars and critical data studies and so on is that I think maybe as linguists and social linguists and discourse analysts, we would have something to learn from these other fields of study, so that we just don't take texts and semiotic stuff from social media, but we try to contextualize these things in terms of what kinds of environments they are. If that answers your questions in any way.
Yeah, because I was thinking about data justice, data citizenship, and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Could you add something about it?
No, yeah, actually, yes, for sure, very central. So this goes to the very heart of things like platform literacy, so that it's not just the imagination of these being so-called free services, right? Because, I mean, in some senses, there is a price to be paid. And data justice, for example, being very central, because, of course, it creates all kinds of new inequalities as well. So in some countries, Facebook, for example, comes readily installed when you buy a mobile phone. And for many people, that is the gateway to the internet. So, I mean, that is an issue of injustice and social inequality as well. How do people access the internet in the first place, and what is their understanding of the internet, and how that relates to data practices and data collection issues on which people may not have the literacy or the understanding, but on the other hand, there are also people who are in a situation where they don't have a choice.
If we still have time, can you say something about ethnography and on this type of context? Because we're all doing ethnographic work, and we know it's pretty, a lot of people are doubtful. Well, ethnography is complicated for a lot of people. How do you see this?
Yeah, that's a very exciting thing. There is some, from my perspective, studying online and digital environments, I often get critique and comments on the question, can you do ethnography online? Is it real ethnography? But this is, it would seem to me, a kind of recurring issue. So that, for instance, when ethnographers went to schools, there were also questions about, well, what kind of ethnography is this, and is it really real? And so I think it's something that reoccurs with every new environment and every new kind of research. And perhaps, so in my work, I think the idea is maybe to make the idea of digital ethnography obsolete, so that it just becomes ethnography. But I think at this moment, there is maybe a need to look into the ways in which digital environments pose new questions and challenges for ethnography, not only in the ethical sense, right? Because, of course, participation and observation, for example, have a different nature, which raises all kinds of ethical questions, but also in terms of how we perhaps could try to understand the human-machine interactions as they take place in many different forms. So
could you add something more about the challenges this methodology could add to our researchers?
Yeah, yes. So, for instance, in terms of participation, in many cases you are obviously invisible, not even known to the people that you study. So I mean, ethical reflection is of course nothing new in ethnography, right? So we shouldn't fetishize it either as some kind of very special thing. But of course, the fact that you are engaging with people only through the screen introduces methodological questions as well. People can run away from you very easily without leaving any trace, for instance, and the obvious ethical questions. And then there is something that I've seen some people already develop a little bit, which is the ethnography of algorithms. So how do we get to the heart of something we don't really understand and that is completely invisible? So how do we, from the practices and the semiotic things that we see on the screen, how do we get from that to an ethnographic contextual understanding of algorithms? I think that's a very big challenge, on which I hope I would have some kind of an answer, but I really don't. It's just something really to think about and maybe relates to the literacy question posed earlier, right?
Yeah, because if you manage to do an ethnography algorithm life, or the algorithm mechanisms, how they are produced, we find out all the secrets, or how the secret lies are told.
Yeah, exactly. And these are company secrets. So,
Yeah.
I mean, we can maybe get to an understanding of how people interact with algorithms. Like Rodney Jones has been talking about, for example, the ways in which people talk with algorithms. So we assign meanings to algorithms, we make projections and have understandings as to how they might work. And then we are in a kind of a feedback loop with the algorithms in trying to get to certain outcomes or try to work use the services to certain ends. And I think that's very interesting, a kind of pragmatic approach to algorithms in terms of how we speak with them.
Do you have more time? Do you figure that multi-sited research, online and offline, is essential to understand contemporary life? Of course, this depends on the topic, on the research topic you have in mind.
Yeah.
How do you see this issue? Because multi-sited is an old issue. I mean, it's
yes,
the famous paper by Marcus in 1995. But now it seems that it has become more crucial, hasn't it, in terms of if you want to understand contemporary life, independently of the topic, I mean, as a general issue.
Yes. Yeah, because in many senses, what we have access to is products, but not the processes through which the products came about. So, for instance, in terms of combining online and offline ethnography, that to get to an understanding of the processes and literacies and how meanings are made and how practices come about, it might be necessary, like you said, depending on your focus, but still might be necessary to engage with people offline as well to get to an understanding of how exactly that works. And also, in some senses, the online research in some cases might work to flatten our understandings of things like inequality, because everything can look equal online, while for many people it takes a lot more effort to get to a certain outcome, right? Because they don't have access to Wi-Fi, or they don't have access to devices, or whatever it might be. So that's another sense in which multi-sided research might be essential. And of course, also multi-sided online, because in many cases, things don't really stay in one context only, but they travel across different contexts.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, Piia.
Thank you.
Thank you. And say hello to everybody in Tilburg.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone in Tilburg. Yes, I will.
Can you meet them?
Yes. Well, I did it already, just in case, because I don't see them now with the pandemic.
Yeah.
So I have to do it. I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's true.